anymore. Maybe your child used to love school and now they're failing classes. Maybe they used to sleep through the night and now they're having nightmares. Maybe they're angry all the time. Maybe they're anxious, they're withdrawing. Maybe they're even hurting themselves. Maybe they're acting years younger than they actually are. And you're wondering, what happened? Today, I want to talk about something I see over and over again in family court that many parents and unfortunately many professionals, including lawyers and judges, don't fully understand. The connection between trauma, PTSD, custody litigation, and what happens to children after they've been exposed to abuse, conflict, coercive control, or chronic stress. Because sometimes what looks like a behavioral problem is actually a trauma response. And if we don't understand that, we can miss what children are trying to tell us. One of the biggest misconceptions I see is the belief that children experience trauma the same way adults do. They don't. Adults can often explain what they're feeling, most of the time. Sometimes if we're leaving a domestic violence relationship, that's one of the things victims really struggle with, is being able to truly explain their experiences. That's what I do with Live Free Legal. I'm attorney Tiffany Lesnik, and I am a survivor of domestic abuse, but I also am a domestic violence attorney. And I help train women to tell their story with confidence and credibility so that they can be more successful in their legal outcome cases. So check us out at livefreelegal.com and make sure to give this channel a like and a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any of this really informative content that I love to share for free. Adults can often explain what they're feeling, right? That's what we just said, but children frequently cannot. A child doesn't usually say, hey, I'm experiencing hypervigilance due to repeated exposure to emotional abuse, right? Never gonna hear a child say that. Instead, they usually manifest their fear or their anxiety in some behavioral ways. They may stop sleeping. They may stop concentrating. They start getting in trouble at school. They become clingy. They become aggressive. They begin struggling in ways that seem confusing or even unrelated. The trauma often comes out through behavior, and that's why parents need to pay attention to these changes. So especially if you're a parent who maybe has left an abusive relationship, maybe your partner or your ex was never abusive to your children directly in the home. They were just always mostly focused on the abuse towards you. But you're really worried now that your children have visitation with him alone. You know, is it possible that my children now are being abused, right? We want to look at behaviors in children. It's the first telltale sign that there might be something going on in that home that we're not aware of that may be putting them at risk. So we do want to be looking at these signs in our children. So one of the very first places that trauma shows up is in school. I often hear parents say, my child was doing fine, and then suddenly everything changed. Grades dropped, teachers report behavioral concerns, assignments aren't completed, my child can't focus, child seems distracted, they begin missing school, they complain a lot of headaches and stomach aches. I know this happened with my own children when I was going through domestic abuse and separation, and then high conflict litigation. That was the number one way that my children really displayed trauma, was through anxiety prior to going to school. I mean, quite honestly, it seemed like every day someone had a headache or a stomach ache or they were throwing up and they just didn't want to go to school. I dreaded every school day morning that I had to get up and start the battle with my children just to get them to school. And the thing that's interesting to me is that school is not where the abuser is, right? But there's something triggering about going to school, whether it's they don't know if their dad's going to show up to pick them up at the end of the day, whether there are bullies that are at school that mimic the behavior of the abuser that they don't want to be present with. Maybe it's they want to just be home in the safe, protective parents' home because that's where they feel most safe. Honestly, I'm not a psychologist. I'd love to have a conversation with one. If you're one and you know the connection between the two, reach out to me. Love to have a conversation, do a webcast with you on the connection between children who are traumatized and why they don't want to go to school. That's one of the first symptoms that we see. If you see that in your child, that's usually a sign there's either something going on at school or there's something going on at home somewhere. So when a child is focused on survival, it's difficult to focus on multiplication, tables, reading assignments, or science projects, right? The problem is that schools sometimes see the behavior but don't understand the cause, and family courts often see the school records without understanding the trauma behind them. And anxiety doesn't always look like anxiety. So many parents expect anxiety to look like nervousness, but in children it can look very different, right? It can look like anger, defiance, meltdowns, perfectionism. You may have a child actually in school that's getting straight A's, performing at the highest levels, participating in everything. They may look awesome, but that might still be hiding an underlying problem. They may be overperforming as a control tactic to deal with some of that trauma. So anything on a continuum that's too extreme on either end could be a red flag. Your children may be experiencing excessive worrying, panic before visitation exchanges, physical complaints, refusing to leave a parent's side. I've seen my own children become physically ill before custody exchanges. And it's not because someone coached them, it's not because someone told them to be afraid, but because their nervous system had learned to associate certain situations with danger, and the body remembers. Their nervous system had learned to associate certain situations with danger. The body remembers even when a child struggles to be able to put into words what they're experiencing. So one issue that often gets overlooked is sleep. Sleep problems can be one of the clearest signs that a child is struggling. Not only do we see issues with school, but we also see issues with sleep. They may be experiencing nightmares, difficulty falling asleep, bedwetting after years without accidents, right? All of a sudden they're starting to wet the bed again. Maybe they're even wetting the bed at an inappropriate age, right? They're 10, 11, 12 years old and they're bedwetting. That is a huge red flag. Maybe they're sleepwalking or having night terrors. Night terrors is when they seem like they're awake. So their eyes are open, they're screaming, they're maybe talking, they seem like they're interacting with you, but they're actually asleep. It's scary to see that, night terrors. They're frequently waking up, they're not having restful sleep, fear of sleeping alone, and then of course exhaustion the next day, which makes going to school even harder, right? The fear of underperforming, of failure in school because they didn't get their homework done, they're not going to be able to keep up in class, they don't want to embarrass themselves in front of their classmates and their teachers. And when children don't sleep, everything else gets worse, right? Their emotions become harder to regulate and school performance declines. Anxiety increases, behavior problems escalate, and as parents, we sometimes focus on the visible behavior and miss the sleep disruption that's fueling it. So one of the most heartbreaking trauma responses I see is regression. So a child who suddenly begins acting younger than their age. A child who starts baby talking. A child who becomes unusually clingy. A child who returns to behaviors they had long outgrown. Maybe they start acting like an animal, or walk around on their hands and feet like a dog, wagging their tail or pretending to be a cat or a monkey or something like that. Parents often worry something is wrong, but regression can be a child's attempt to seek safety during overwhelming stress. It's not manipulation, it's not laziness, it's often a sign that the child is struggling emotionally. So, one of the things that you can do as a parent, as a protective parent, is to get your child help if you're seeing any of these behaviors. And when I say help, you can either maybe go to the school, talk to a guidance counselor. Many times abusers won't allow you to seek therapy for your children. So if he's not allowing you to seek therapy for your children, go speak to the guidance counselor. Let them know what's going on. It may be that guidance counselor can be an advocate or a life support for your child within the school system, and that guidance counselor is likely not going to need the abuser's consent in order to speak with your child or support your child in any way. So that can be a lifeline for your child. They can also potentially come testify later on at a trial. The goal is not to build a case or build evidence here. The goal is to get support for your child. But if you have people in place, you will have them later on in order to testify to protect your child. The gold standard would be to get your child into some form of individual therapy with a therapist who is trauma trained, trauma informed. Not all therapists are created equally, right? There are a lot of therapists who are highly manipulated by abusive personalities. They don't understand the trauma dynamics. So you need to make sure that you do some research and you find a therapist who understands trauma, who can treat the underlying symptoms, can work with your child on techniques like EMDR and DBT and trauma-based therapies, maybe some type of play therapy, and that they're able to handle the aggressiveness of the abuser's behavior when they start trying to interfere with therapy. Again, a good trauma-based therapist is going to help your child advocate for themselves. It's going to help them manage their anxiety and their stress. It's going to help create safety plan, help them create mechanisms by which they will maintain their safety when they're with the abusive parent, and then they can act as a witness later on too in the event you need to file for emergency custody or a protective order or seek some type of legal recourse for your child. So as an action item, try to have supports built around your children in some way. Their individual therapy is the best option. Guidance counselor at school, another potential option. A pastor, a Sunday school teacher, someone within the local church you can come alongside as a support for your child. Maybe a neighbor, maybe there's a role model on the street that lives on your street that can provide support, somebody to talk to. Anyone who you can surround that child with will be helpful in helping them get things out, right? We want to be processing some really big, heavy emotions. I want to talk about when children get a little bit older. And we do see this in some younger children as well, but I want to talk about self-harm and high-risk behaviors. It's difficult, but it's important to talk about. And sometimes trauma manifests itself through self-harm or other high-risk behaviors. We more often than not see this in preteens, tweens, or teens, adolescents. But this usually includes things like cutting, threats of self-harm. So they may say, I wish I could die, or I'm going to kill myself. I wish I was never here. Substance use, and that can be both alcohol or other types of drugs or illicit substances. Risk-taking behaviors, so maybe driving recklessly or engaging in other reckless activities, running away. Extreme emotional outbursts. They might start acting a little bit like the abuser, cussing you out, screaming at you, and this could go on for 20, 30 minutes, maybe hours at a time. These situations should be taken very seriously, right? You do need to seek help for your child. You do need to document, and you do need to let the abuser know that these things are going on, so that in the event you have to file an action later on in court, it's been documented. Hey, just wanted to let you know that our daughter has been cutting herself with a razor blade, and she's got scars all over her arm. Just want to let you know that our son last night threatened to kill himself. I think I need to take him to the hospital and have him evaluated. Just to let you know, I caught our child drinking or using some type of marijuana, whatever the substance might be, so that then when he replies back with, oh, you're making that all up, you're just being overly dramatic, you're trying to cause problems, and they don't support you in getting help for your child, then you can take that information into court and show the court you've been involving him, you've been giving him this information, you've been taking this very, very seriously, you've been trying to get help for your child, and he's just discounting it and blowing it out the window. That will harm his ability to get custody in the future and hopefully help your case as well. Plus, the ultimate goal, again, is making sure that we're helping your child. We want them to be safe. Children don't engage in these behaviors because they're trying to create legal evidence. They're engaging in these behaviors because they're really hurting and they don't know how else to process the fear and the hurt that they're going through. They're overwhelmed. And when children don't have the language to express pain, they sometimes express it through behavior. And so one of the biggest challenges in custody litigation is that courts often focus on the behavior without understanding the cause. So the court sees poor grades, behavioral issues, visitation resistance, and anger, anxiety, and the question becomes why? Is this just normal adolescent behavior? Because adolescents go through a lot, especially today in today's society. It is hard being a teenager. I would absolutely not want to be a teenager again in 2026. But the court needs to be asking, we always need to be asking, 1 in 3 at least, and that statistic could be could be nominalized. We always need to be asking, is this trauma? Is there something happening in one household? Is there something happening in both households? These are complicated questions, and a red flag for me as an attorney, and if you're a judge watching this, a red flag for you should be if one parent is consistently saying, we're having issues, I'm having behavioral problems with this child, and especially if it's backed up by objective professional evidence like medical records or school records or psychological records, and you have another parent on the complete end of the continuum that's like, everything's fine, my child is perfect, my child never misbehaves, it's only when they're with the protective parent, right? Or mom is the problem, and they completely discount their child's behavior. Usually when I see those two things, so one parent concerned and the other parent not concerned at all because the child is perfect, that's usually a sign that one of the parents either is lying and they're abusive and they're trying to hide what's happening in their household, or they're abusive and they have no insight into their own behavior. They don't realize that they are the common denominator in all of the problems that are happening. They don't recognize that it's their behavior that's the problem, okay? So we need to be asking as attorneys and judges, as parents, as professionals, as therapists, as evaluators, is this trauma? Are these behaviors related to trauma? Could they be related to trauma in some way? It deserves careful investigation rather than just assumptions, right? Children deserve adults who are willing to look deeper. They deserve protection. So this is where I want to speak directly to my moms out there, or to parents who have children who are potentially in abusive situations. One of the biggest mistakes I see is parents trying to diagnose their child. Don't do that. You are not trying to prove PTSD. You are documenting observations. Instead of writing, my child has PTSD, document. My child woke up crying 3 times this week. Write the date down. My child reported nightmares after visitation. Write the date down. Keep a custody schedule so that you can look at when your child was with the abusive parent and when these behavioral issues are occurring. You can create an overlay map of everything that's going on. My child's teacher reported a decline in grades. My child began wetting the bed after being fully potty trained for years. Or my child expressed fear after or about attending visitation. You want to focus on facts, you want to focus on dates, focus on statements your child is making, behavioral changes, school records, medical records, counseling recommendations, therapeutic records. Documentation is strongest when it is objective. And the goal is not to build a case against someone. The goal is to accurately document what your child is experiencing. If you take all the time and effort into documenting, the court sees, okay, you actually really care about this, right? This must be happening. Why else would you be taking all of this time in order to document all of these things? So if you're watching this and you're worried about your child, I want you to hear this. You are not crazy for noticing changes. You are not overreacting because you're paying attention. Children often communicate their pain through behavior long before they have the words to explain it. The answer isn't panic. The answer isn't jumping to conclusions. The answer is observation, documentation, and support, and getting children the help that they need. Because sometimes the most important evidence in a custody case isn't what a child says, it's what their behavior has been trying to tell us all along. If this video helped you, please like, subscribe, and share it with another parent who may be trying to understand what is happening to their child. And tell me in the comments, what changes have you noticed in children who are struggling after abuse, divorce, or high conflict custody litigation? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Join me next week, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on YouTube at Live Free Legal. I am Tiffany Lesnik, a domestic violence survivor and domestic violence attorney. The information shared with you today does not constitute legal advice. It is legal education, and watching this video does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you find this helpful. Please, again, do me a favor, subscribe. The more subscribers I get, the more I can pump this information out to more women who need to hear this information. Thanks so much. See you next time.